Hey everyone, it's Asa, and welcome to my video on sample sizes and data. I would say there's a very simple TLDR for this, which is if you're using any data, make sure there are at least 1,000 games of whatever sample you're looking at. That's just a general rule of thumb. As always, more data is just more reliable. I think once you get to like the 5,000 mark, it's very reliable at that point. If you use something a little less than 1,000, let's say you use like 800, it's like fairly reliable, but it's a little iffy. But basically, I'll talk about how you can kind of decide for yourself how much stock to put into something. So, Guthers, creator of AesahTFT, we were kind of talking about this, looking at like different placement distributions. Some of these, of course, are like more first or eighth. Some of these are more uh, evenly distributed. Um, yeah, we're talking about like some stuff, but basically, what you really have to know is just this thing right here in the middle. So basically, if you're looking for a 100 game sample size, if something's a true average of a 4.5, it would not be that unlikely for you to observe it as like a 4.1 or a 4.9. Even with 1,000 games, if something's true average is a 4.5, it's not that unlikely to observe it as like a 4.65. There's a 95 confidence interval. What that means is that 95% of the time, your observed thing in 1,000 samples will be between these two numbers. 95% is generally what we call like a standard error. If you want to be a little bit less confident, it's fine. For example, if you're just 90% confident with 1,000 samples, you would still be like pretty close to this instead of 95%. So you would still usually be right. That being said, it's just kind of better to be safe than sorry. So if possible, you should always try to increase the ELO bracket is a good way to get more sample, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. The more sample you get, for example, once you get up to 3,000, the more accurate it is. If we were to make this like 100,000 games for whatever it is, it would look very, very close to 4.5. But you can see basically as the sample goes up, the more accurate it is. So I'll just show an example of this with 6 Bastion Yasuo. Again, I need to make a guide on this video, or a video on this comp, which I have not done yet. Picking up in popularity, so it's not that popular. So a lot of people will use something like Masters Plus, but you can see the overall games is not that much, just in general. Even for regular items, even for something like Giant Slayer, it's only 1,000 games, which again is kind of on the cusp of where I'm kind of like, okay, like I'm okay looking at it, but I want to have a little bit of reservations. The lower you go, when you go down here to like 300 games, now I want to be like pretty careful. Um, Again, as a reminder, with 1,000 games, a standard error is like plus or minus like 0.15 delta. Um, so like 1,000 games here, for example, like we're seeing 0.06. It wouldn't be that surprising if a Bloodthirster's true delta was like a negative zero point 0.1. But then it's because by true delta, I mean if we played 100,000 games, this would be like a negative zero point 0.1. But because we're only looking at a relatively small sample, it shows up as plus delta. So this is especially relevant with artifacts just because the frequency is so low on a lot of these. So you can see like at Masters Plus across all regions on current patch, we can see some things like Mittens, for example, showing as positive delta, whereas like Fishbones is neutral delta. But if we want like a bigger sample, we go to Diamond. Not really anything really changes besides just like how many games are played. It's not like Diamond players are significantly different in how they're playing this than Masters players. We can see Fishbones actually becomes quite positive delta, and Mittens actually becomes decently minus delta. It's just because the samples are so small that it just happens so that even like 3 people queue up a game and go eighth with this comp with a certain item, that is already like enough to swing the data, and it's just not enough to get a reliable read. So I might go to like Emerald, and once again, Emerald players don't play this comp that differently than Diamond players. So you can see like Fishbones gets a little bit closer to 0, and Mittens once again becomes plus delta. You will see that like while these are kind of fluctuate between minus or plus delta, they're all kind of close. They're not going to go anything that crazy. Like this isn't going to become like a full like +5, or anything like that, or +4. Like with Flicker Blades and Hole Crushers, it's not going to swing that extreme. But a lot of the times when you are making decisions, you kind of are looking at these kind of zero point 0.1 differences. Again, like Fishbones, as we saw, in Masters Plus was 0, and Diamond Plus it was 0.17, even though, with 400 games. So a lot of times when you are looking at these, um, just be a little bit more careful. If possible, use like the biggest sample size you can. Um, and yeah, this basically like looking at Plat Plus, I would think even for challenger level games, I would think the data represented here is the most indicative out of all the filters we looked for this particular one, just because the sample size is the biggest. And just because these are too small, it's not always about the biggest sample. If we use something, let's say we use something like 6 Duelist Ash, and we're just looking at regular items. Now, if we're looking at even down here, something like Striker's Flow, 20,000 games. This is plenty of games, so I would think we're actually more accurate going up to Diamond Plus. We're still looking at 4,000 games, which is, in my opinion, enough. 4,000 games is still quite enough. So at this point, I think Diamond Plus is more indicative of Challenger, of how the item performs in Challenger. But again, if we look at artifacts and we look at something with like only like 154 games, like Mittens, I think this will probably be more accurate if we look at Emerald Plus, just because the sample is so small. Again, the short version is just use things that have at least 1,000 games. If you have any comments or questions, let me know in the Discord, and thanks for watching.